Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, TJ Mabarty. Today is Thursday, April 4th, and we're going to be diving into a lot of NFL today, revisiting the Stefon Diggs trade that broke yesterday, and sort of taking a little bit of a deeper look from the perspectives of both teams now that we've had a little bit of time to settle. And I want to specifically look at the way that the Texans have been able to turn around this experience with the Houston organization over the past few years after being a little bit of a dumpster fire for a bit there. And now they are one of the brightest futures in the NFL. We'll get into that as well as the Bills side of it. And then we are going to touch on the story about how the Kansas City Chiefs plan that they proposed in February to try and renovate Arrowhead Stadium was rejected. And as the contract is coming up on the end of its lease soon, there is some possible buzz that they could look to relocate to an area that would be more willing to help finance these types of moves. So we'll dive into that. And then finally, we are going to do a little basketball to end off the show and talking about the fact that Julius Randle has just been ruled out for the remainder of the season. He's set to undergo surgery that will cut him off before the playoffs begin, and this is the last we have seen of him. So we are going to dive into all of that. Just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Use the comment section both with our live viewers and our post-production videos that go out. Make this whole entire process as interactive as possible. Additionally, if any of our live viewers would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker throughout the show. That is GSMCpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated. It goes to all of our show hosts here at the GSMC Sports Network. Now, though, getting into our first segment of the day, talking about the Houston Texans and the way that they've really been able to turn their entire trajectory of their franchise around in very little time. Often it can be very difficult to sort of undergo a rebuild in the NFL because of the fact that a lot of the times it comes down to that quarterback position, and that is clearly not an easy position to fill in terms of having a solidified franchise guy. And to be able to move on from one to another, I know that, once every decade plus the Packers are able to pull it off, but ultimately it is not that easy. And the Texans, who haven't historically been, this top tier franchise, has done a tremendous job over the past couple years, shuffling just about everything that was in that organization and turning them into one of the Super Bowl favorites for this upcoming season, where we saw up until last season, the future was pretty grim for them. They were coming off of a stretch of 3 seasons where they won 4 games, and 3 games from 2020 to 2022. They were a mess from a front office standpoint. In 2019, they had Bill O'Brien as not just their head coach, but their GM as well. To this day, I don't understand how anybody really let Bill O'Brien, and it's not fully a knock on him personally, but you have to be a very high level, in my eyes, of established in the league to be able to garner that type of power. And I just have no idea where it came from there with O'Brien. And then you talk about the actual coaching perspective of O'Brien as well. And in 2019, the Texans made the playoffs. They reached the divisional round, so they won a game. Not that they had a bad season by any means, and they faced off against the Kansas City Chiefs and the up-and-coming Patrick Mahomes in the divisional round. They lucked into in some ways with some turnovers, but and some special teams plays, but they got themselves a 24-0 lead in that first quarter against the Chiefs, and then went on to allow 41 unanswered points in really an all-time collapse. Completely fell apart here. They didn't fire Bill O'Brien after this game because they had won a playoff game. It would have been a little bit extreme, but of course he had that fake punt late in the first quarter on his own side of the field that a lot of people were saying that decision alone was fireable. I don't know about that, but it's not until partway through the 2020 season that they do end up firing him. They were abysmal that year, and at this point they just won 4 games, but you do still have Deshaun Watson under contract, and the way he was playing at that time was tremendous. And I know that the version of Deshaun Watson that we see today is not the version that he was up and coming, but in 2020, he threw for 4,800 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. So he was still a tremendous player at this point. And, you know, I feel like I am a little bit more on the player side in certain instances in terms of I feel like your star franchise player should have at least be a part of the conversation as to what else goes on in the organization. I'm not saying they should dictate everything, but the Texans made it very clear that Deshaun Watson had no say in their next head coach. And I do think that, you know, depending on where you stand in the sort of player empowerment spectrum of it all, maybe you think that it was totally in their right to do so. I can't say it wasn't in their right. I just feel like it was bad business at the time, and that soured the relationship between the Texans and Watson. And ultimately, that whole saga took place where he sat out a year. There were some legal situations that were involved, but the Texans were just kind of a joke for a good bit there. And now to see what they've been able to do to turn themselves around into a 10-win team again this past season, winning a playoff game with a rookie head coach and a rookie quarterback, you have to feel great about where they're at today. I want to look quickly at the past 2 drafts that they've had. Last year, they added CJ Stroud, of course, Will Anderson, Tank Dell, Henry Toho. I want to apologize. I don't even know what I called him yesterday. I was trying to spit off his name off the top of my head, and I absolutely butchered it. But all very solid players there. And then Derek Stingley Jr., Jalen Petrie, Christian Harris, all in the 2022 draft. And those are some real building blocks to sort of come up. They were real contributors for them last year and played a big part in them making the playoffs. And that's not even including 2 other potential starters that they've drafted in the first 2 rounds of the past couple years on the offensive line that have been dealing with injuries. Last year, they took Juice Scruggs in the 2nd round of the draft. He got injured towards the end of training camp, wasn't able to play until November, but then he stepped in that center role and started down the stretch of the season into the playoffs. And they also had Kenyon Green, who they took 15th overall in 2022, that hasn't had the best start to his career. He was dealing with a shoulder injury even dating back to that rookie season that sort of affected his play. He struggled then, and he missed all of last season with a shoulder injury as well. But 2 potential starters going forward there on the offensive line as well for the Texans. And they've just done such a good job from an organization that was a little bit of a laughingstock for a period of time there. And I also feel like it sort of gets washed away because of the fact that they were so impressive drafting both the offensive and defensive rookies of the year last season. But also, if you look at last year's draft, there was a real chance that they could have absolutely screwed themselves in terms of they gave up their 1st round pick from this year in order to move up to I believe at the time it was the 3rd overall pick. They took Stroud with number 2, and then they traded up to get Will Anderson at number 3. Maybe I have those numbers flip-flopped, but ultimately it was one and the same, really. They gave up draft capital to take cornerstone guys on both offense and defense, and if they don't win 10 games last year and make it as far as they could be in a little bit of a similar situation to where the Panthers are this year, where they got their rookie quarterback, which is all good, but especially when you look at the Texans last year, there was still a lot of unknown with the rest of that roster, and clearly the talent was there, and they've done a tremendous job from a coaching standpoint to be able to elevate that play, but they were absolutely not a shoo-in to win the division. The expectations were much lower last year, and that's why Demeco Ryans was one of the Coach of the Year candidates. And again, this could have gone a lot worse if either one of those players in Stroud and Anderson didn't pan out. But up to this point, it seems like they have hit home runs with both of those. And I know that a lot of people, specifically Will Anderson Jr., was seen as the top defender in last year's draft. But there were still some people that were a little uncertain on how his game would translate from college when he was at Alabama to the NFL. And CJ Stroud, anytime you're taking a quarterback in the first round, it seems like it's a little bit of sort of a roulette as to who hits and who doesn't. And they got a great prospect in Stroud that was able to help elevate their roster as well. So everything looks fine, but I do want to give the front office credit where I don't feel like a lot of people are talking about, to be able to make that type of a maneuver in the first round and come out unscathed. It was a risky move at the time, and now it just seems like a home run of a move. And because that's the case, they have all these franchise cornerstones on their rookie contracts, which is why they are able to go out and make a deal like the Stefon Diggs trade that they made yesterday, and only giving up a 2nd round pick. Now they take on Diggs's expensive contract, but again, they have all of these players who are on such cheap deals, where I believe Nico Collins is the one player I'm going to double check here. He's still on his rookie contract. Tank Dell is on his rookie contract. Nico Collins entering the final year of his, but Collins, Dell, CJ Stroud, all of these players are on these cheap contracts, and now you add, a legitimate number 1 receiver where, give Nico Collins the credit he deserves. He's been incredible. He showed a little bit of flash in 2022 if you look at some of the box score stuff, but truthfully, going into last year, I was not aware of Nico Collins, and I don't think I'm alone in that camp. A lot of people probably didn't, unless you were really tuned into the Texans. He had a couple big fantasy football weeks, I know, which had some people at least familiar with the name. But now you go out and you get Diggs, who should be a legitimate number 1 receiver, to go along with the other plethora of talent you have in terms of weapons on that offense. You restructure a deal with Joe Mixon to get an upgrade at the running back position, and you just have to feel great about the Texans going forward. Would like to see their offensive line, and yesterday when I talked about this, I had to dive a little bit more into their offensive line situation to get a better understanding. Still not necessarily a lock that they're going to be healthy and they're going to be tremendous. When you look at the Baltimore game that took place in the divisional round, they were really outworked in the trenches on both sides of the ball, which ultimately was, I can't say the whole reason, but it's why CJ Stroud never even really had a chance because of the situation he was put into. Hopefully we see players like Green and Scruggs take steps in the right direction. You already have the blindside tackle in Laramie Tunsil, one of the best in the game there. And I just feel like when you look at the Texans as a whole here, they are at the top of the AFC and the top of the NFL as a whole. I'm going to look up right now the odds for the Super Bowl next season, I would have to imagine that the Texans are probably hovering around that third spot in the AFC. I'm not sure if they're able to overtake the Bills necessarily, who we are going to be diving into in the next segment. Yeah, it does appear that the Bills are still ahead of them. This is according to Caesars Sportsbook, where the Bills are plus 1,300, the Texans are plus 1,500, actually tied with the Bengals as well. And I guess that's not the most shocking thing in the world either, because we do a lot of the time see these sophomore slumps as teams get a little bit more film and can just see the team's game planning more against your star quarterback. We'll see if that happens with CJ Stroud. Again, I talked about this yesterday in my expectations for the second year quarterbacks. I feel like some of the stats as a whole might not look as good for Stroud. He was very deliberate in terms of not turning the ball over, being effective. I probably expect to see a little bit more turnovers this year and some instances where he's a little more uncomfortable, but I still trust him as a quarterback. I don't think he's going to, as a quarterback, the future of him be worse next year. And the Texans are in a tremendous position here where they have so many key guys on those rookie contracts that they're able to go out and spend like they did in this offseason, both on the Diggs trade, but also going out and ramping up some on defense with Danielle Hunter, Azeez Al-Shaair, Demeco Ryans, and I'm really excited to see this Texans team next season. Their win line is still sitting at 9.5. I was curious whether or not that was going to move based off of this Diggs deal. It has not yet. So if you're a believer, maybe that's a number that could definitely stick out. They won 10 games last year. Do you or do you not think that they can match that same win total? Again, feel like the second year quarterback thing does sort of loom over them. I think that AFC South division is probably a little bit more competitive than a lot of people maybe want to give it credit for, but Texans should be an awesome watch this year. Really hope we see them continue to build off of the really solid foundation, again, that they sort of pulled out of nowhere when you look at how those first few seasons went for them. So great stuff there in Houston. Have to give tons of credit to all of those involved, and we'll see, because maybe we have a Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator of the Texans, getting a contract offer to be a head coach in the next offseason if things go well this year. So tons of storylines to monitor there in Houston, of course, and I haven't even really talked all that much about Diggs alone to see whether or not he's able to settle in to this environment in Houston. But we're going to be taking our first break here, and when we come back on the other side, we will be diving into the Bills side of everything here. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just finished up talking about the Texans' perspective on not just the Stefon Diggs trade, but the way that their front office has really been able to pull themselves together after living in the basement for a few years there, and now they are a potential Super Bowl contender with a very bright future. But now we're going to look on the other side of that Diggs trade and talk about the Buffalo Bills, where we saw a similar situation as we do anytime we have these young quarterbacks who are overperforming their contract. You have that first window in the first handful of years that is, I wouldn't say wide open, because you also still have to deal with the fact that you have a young quarterback that can sometimes be mistake prone at times. And the Bills were sort of in this situation where they had plenty of opportunities during the course of these first few seasons with Josh Allen, and now they're in a place where he's on his contract extension, and he's getting more and more expensive by the year, and as a result, we're seeing the Bills have to sort of cut ties with a handful of these more expensive players that have been on their roster for some time, where we saw the Diggs trade, as well as, like we talked about yesterday, so we don't need to go too in-depth on it, but the Tre'Davious Whites, the Jordan Poyers, the Micah Hydes, and letting others walk in free agency like Gabe Davis and Mitch Morse. So definitely a retooling time here. I don't want to dive into it too much, but this whole idea of, is the championship window closed? I would say no, because for it to close, that would mean that there's no chance that they could find their way back into Super Bowl contention, because they have Josh Allen, which is pretty much the sole reason. If you look at DraftKings, their win total is still 10.5 even after the Diggs trade. So the loss of one receiver didn't totally alter the situation there in Buffalo in terms of what Vegas expects them to do, which I believe is fair, because Diggs wasn't necessarily a big-time asset for them down the stretch of the season, didn't have a 100-yard game after week 6 during the regular season, and like I sort of alluded to yesterday as well, I thought that there were times where the Bills' offense looked better as Josh Allen was sort of spreading the ball around more, and Stefon Diggs was incredibly vital for Josh Allen during his development in his early years there and having a true number one guy. But I do believe that Josh Allen is at the point where he can take on, and I'm not saying, I think Robert Griffin III actually made a comment on social media yesterday. I know the situations aren't entirely equivalent, but the fact that Josh Allen, the way that he phrased it is, Josh Allen now has the chance to prove himself the way that Patrick Mahomes did when he lost Tyreek Hill. Obviously, it is massive to have that number one option, that weapon that can help elevate your game during your early years before you have that full NFL experience. But at a certain point, if you are a legitimate, top tier quarterback in the league, you get to a point where you can elevate all of the players around you. And I do think that Josh Allen can be that caliber of quarterback. I know that it's been sort of popular since their playoff loss to they lost to the Chiefs this year, yeah. Since they lost to the Chiefs in the divisional round, that it's been a little bit popular to sort of downplay, oh, well, he wasn't able to get it done in the biggest moments. I just don't see it that way. I thought that, I think in that game specifically, you look, the run game all of a sudden went from being really effective to entirely ineffective. Josh Allen in some of these late game plays, I will admit, I feel like he gets a little bit locked on to certain weapons. He can overlook, second, third options. He still has maturing to do, but I do still think that he is a top 3 quarterback in the league, and he has the ceiling to be an MVP caliber player. And all that being said, the Bills do still, when you look at whether or not they can be as competitive this year as they were last year, they can in some degree. They are a worse team today without Stefon Diggs than they're the worst team today without Stefon Diggs. That is absolutely true. But I think that it's not unsalvageable that they're going down this dark path here where they're going to entirely fall out of it. They still have Josh Allen, who can do wonders for your offense. You seemingly had more of a run game last year in James Cook and the way that developed over the course of the year. So hopefully that can come back as well. But they are going to need a number one receiver. Their top three right now is Curtis Samuel, who they just brought in, Khalil Shakir, the second year now, I believe. They drafted him in 2022 in the 5th round. He really developed into a nice weapon for them. And it's Mac Hollins, who they brought in from Atlanta as well. So they need a new number one wide receiver, and they probably have to address this in the draft. I think would be probably their number one need in terms of headed into next season still. They have the number 28 overall pick here. So this is a very deep wide receiver class. There could be plenty of first round caliber talent players available when they're still picking. Some of the names that, if you look at the way that big boards have it all slated out, or some mock drafts, Brian Thomas, I think he actually goes maybe earlier than a lot of these mock drafts have him at, but Brian Thomas from LSU, Adonai Mitchell from Texas, Ladd McConkey from Georgia, Xavier Worthy from Texas, and Keon Coleman from Florida State. All of these guys could be solid options, some more than others. I think that I would have Thomas, Mitchell, and McConkey as sort of the priority in this group, but still plenty of valid options. Even if you go further down in the list as well, I think there are plenty of guys who could find their way into very valuable roles on NFL teams next year. But could they trade up for a new elite wide receiver one? They have if you look, the top tier wide receivers in this upcoming class are seen to be really, solidified, great options, great prospects in Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze. We have a comment here from Galaxy, where he said, I want to see Xavier Legette on the Bills, to be honest. I think that Legette is also somebody from South Carolina. He has been a big-time riser during the combine process and everything, that I also think he could definitely be a sleeper wide receiver in this class. That's the thing, is these are the names I mentioned that, projected to be first-round grade, but I'm also really huge as a Patriots fan. Ricky Pearsall from Florida, I think that he's going to be a great pro. This is such a talented wide receiver class that it seems like every year you have these can't miss guys, and ultimately, one way or another, one of the guys don't pan out. Last year, Quentin Johnston, who I'm not fully out on, but had a very disappointing rookie year, and when he was coming out of TCU, I loved him. So, we see all of these big names and the big-time prospects. Sometimes they don't always pan out, but it feels like you almost have to try to miss on the prospect, mismanage them as they come into the NFL to try and draft a receiver in the top 2 rounds here and not get a quality player out of it. So yeah, Legette's another great option there. I'm not saying they don't even have to be limited to just one necessarily in this draft as well. We'll see how they decide to play this out, but there was a little bit of buzz on Twitter yesterday about the idea of them trading up into the top 10 potentially to try and go get a guy. Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably unavailable. Sounds like he's going to be going number 4 to the Cardinals. We'll see how they choose to play their cards in that situation. They could also, trade down a little bit, see if somebody wants to slide into 4 for J.J. McCarthy. But Marvin Harrison Jr. seems a little expensive, but Malik Neighbors is a name that has really been sort of talked about. Oh, well, he would be so great in the Buffalo situation there. And I sort of wanted to address that. Sam Monson of Pro Football Focus went back to the 2011 draft where we had a little bit of a comparable situation of a team late in the first round trading up into the top 10 to take a top-end wide receiver prospect. And in 2011, we saw the Atlanta Falcons trade from 27 up to 6 to select Julio Jones. So Monson laid out what the trade package was at the time there. They traded with the Browns, giving up their 27th overall pick, a second and a fourth rounder in that same 2011 draft, and then their first rounder in 2012, as well as a fourth rounder. So 5 picks, 3 of which being in the first 2 rounds. I feel like for the Bills here, it's a little bit risky to try and swing big in a situation like that. And, you think back and you look at that Julio Jones deal, where I disagreed with Monson, is I think he said that it didn't really work out for Atlanta. I have a hard time, coming away with Julio Jones's career in Atlanta and saying that they made the wrong move in that situation for everything that he did for the organization. Did they win a Super Bowl? No, but he helped lead them to a Super Bowl, and credit Matt Ryan, of course, as well, but he also helped maximize the talent of Matt Ryan, who ended up winning an MVP that same year as well. So, these types of moves can definitely help. And if you get a guy like Malik Neighbors, we just talked in depth about the idea of how valuable it is to have these key cornerstone guys playing on rookie contracts. That would absolutely be the case if you get a, can't miss prospect like Neighbors. But there is also the sort of situation here where the Bills are going to have a lot of holes to fill in the next couple years, especially because of the fact that their front office has not done a tremendous job drafting up to this point, which is also, briefly, maybe even a reason to take the can't miss guy, because they haven't been tremendous in that department up to this point. But again, like I sort of mentioned, and Galaxy mentioned in the comment section as well, there are so many talented receivers in this class that it feels like even sitting at 28, you're going to get a quality player as long as you do your due diligence as a front office and pick the right guy for your scheme. But it is interesting when you sort of weigh all of this. We've seen the best version of Josh Allen when he has a truly elite wide receiver 1. Stefon Diggs had that interaction that took place a couple days ago where he definitely mirrored that idea. Someone on social media, I don't have the exact username, I'm sorry, but somebody put out there saying that a top-tier receiver isn't essential for Josh Allen to succeed. Stefon Diggs responded to that, questioning it, saying, "You sure?" And again, like I sort of talked about, I thought that Josh Allen, the way that he was able to put together some more of these real methodical drives was something that we hadn't seen from him in the past, which is something I really keyed in on following their loss to the Bengals in 2022, because it seemed like it was just home run, like big player bust for them. And that even carried into their first game of the season against the New York Jets, where he had 3 turnovers, 3 interceptions. I think he had 4 turnovers total because I think he fumbled as well. But 3 interceptions, just chucking it deep and hoping to come away with something. We know that Josh Allen has the arm for that, but I don't believe that that is the best way to utilize him going forward. I think he can do more than just sort of those home run types of swings. And ultimately, when you look at the Bills here going forward, again, it depends on how you want to weigh the situation. I think they're going to need to try and plug a variety of different players in some holes as they come, and having them on rookie contracts can be very beneficial. Again, as long as you hit on the picks, but with the type of money you're going to have to pay Josh Allen going forward. And I mean, truthfully, when you do look at their roster, they're talented. I don't know how many real blue chip guys you can really say are on their roster. Now, they just paid Dion Dawkins as well to a contract extension this offseason. Dawkins is a very talented player. Hopefully we see some more guys come up in the pipeline for them. But really interesting situation here for the Bills. I guess just one last time here before we take our break to reiterate, I don't think that their championship window is closed as long as you have a top 3 quarterback in the league, but they absolutely have a ways to go in needing to fill in the pieces around him, which I think is possible. And as much as I don't love Sean McDermott necessarily, he also has been leading the Bills to the playoffs since he got there when Tyrod Taylor was the quarterback and the team was very much had a different personality, identity, and McDermott can be a nice defensive mind as well. So we'll see whether or not they continue to develop some of these young pieces that have been maybe not necessarily stars yet, but when you do look at their draft, there are the likes of some of these defensive players like Terrell Bernard, Christian Benford, Gregory Rousseau that have shown some flashes but haven't fully come together just yet, and curious to see whether or not he and the Bills can fully unlock the potential of this roster. But for now, we're going to be taking our second break. We will be right back, and when we come back, we're going to be diving into the situation surrounding the Kansas City Chiefs and the future of their stadium after the renovation plan was rejected by the state there. So stick with us. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished talking about the both Bills and Texans from the perspectives of what they look like moving forward. Now we're going to be going off the field a little bit here and talking about the situation around the Kansas City Chiefs stadium proposal and what the future looks like for Chiefs Kingdom. So very interesting here, where in February, Chiefs chairman / owner Clark Hunt announced a plan to renovate Arrowhead Stadium. The costs were projected to cost about $800 million, and the proposal would have the taxpayers of Missouri cover over 50% of the cost. I actually think more specific to Missouri, it was Jackson County. I'm not a politician. I don't know exactly how that all works, but again, Hunt said that he and his family would help cover $300 million in this, but the rest would be on the public. This was just voted on by Jackson County the other day and was rejected. This is a very interesting situation here where you're talking about the Kansas City Chiefs, who have course, have just won back-to-back Super Bowls, have the face of the NFL in Patrick Mahomes playing there. And all of that being said, when you look at the Hunt family and their perception, even within that Chiefs fandom, it's not a very positive review from my understanding, and it seems that the players sort of add on to that sentiment with the fact that the NFL report cards were released earlier this offseason. For those of you who don't know, the NFL has started this new activity over the past couple seasons. The Players Association has started this exercise where the players on the team are asked to grade a variety of different aspects of the team that they play for, from head coach to owner, cafeteria, locker room, all of those different things. It is a very fascinating sort of experiment there that they do. We did a video about it when they first came out, but if you're interested, I would definitely recommend checking that out. But during this report card, the Hunt family was given an F-, graded as the worst owner in the NFL, and it seems to be tied in the fact that Hunt has a perception of being a little bit cheap and not investing into the team and the facilities. They were 31st in training room, 26th in food and cafeteria, F with a graded F as a locker room grade. So definitely not the highest of praise here for Hunt in the way that he has run this organization. Now, obviously, his idea right now is to renovate a bunch of things with Arrowhead Stadium that would likely improve a bunch of these things, but to propose an $800 million plan here that you aren't even willing to cover 50% of the costs yourself, it's definitely not the best look. Listen, I don't have anywhere near the amount of money that could possibly even imagine covering $400 million. So who am I to necessarily make comments about this? But again, it was your proposal in the first place to make things that expensive. I'm sure you could have, downsized the plans a little bit to maybe not be quite as renovated as you were once hoping, but at least you improve the environment there at Arrowhead, and you can actually get the taxpayers to be on board with this, which as things currently stand, seems that they're not. I did find it interesting because I wanted to look a little bit into at least what type of revenue that the Chiefs bring in. Like I mentioned, they just won back-to-back Super Bowls. They have the face of the league, the most marketable player in the NFL, plus Travis Kelce, who's also probably in the top 5 or so most marketable. After, he started dating Taylor Swift, maybe top 5 is even too low for him. But, this is the premier NFL franchise of the past 5 or so years. But according to Forbes, where they do this evaluation of how much each not just NFL franchise, but franchises in all of sports all across the world, how much they are worth. And they actually, in 2023, now keep in mind, this is before the Chiefs just won. It was a few months after winning their first Super Bowl, second really in the Mahomes era, but the 2023 Super Bowl, and before they won this year, they were ranked number 35 as the total evaluation of their franchise in the world, 23rd in NFL franchises. You had some interesting teams ahead of them. There was the Titans, the Falcons, the Colts, all of these different franchises that, I don't want to dive into necessarily and tearing apart fan bases, markets, all of that. Kansas City isn't necessarily a big-time sports market, but for the amount of success that they've had over this past decade or so, I was just surprised. And We'll see. I would have to imagine they grow over the next couple years as well. They were up one spot, I believe, from the 2022 evaluation, so at least some progress there, but still not all overwhelming in terms of how much they seem to be worth. And it does sort of spark an interesting question in that dynamic between the Hunt family and how much they're willing to invest versus how much they are actually worth. I mean, at this point, you think of it in terms of buying stocks. This seems pretty low for Kansas City that's going to have the best quarterback in the NFL for the next decade or so. So, I don't know. I can't say I know too much about the full X's and O's of the business perspective in the sports world. If we have any viewers out there that can provide a more professional explanation of all of this, I would be all ears. But because of this whole situation, there has been some speculation about the idea, well, could the Kansas City Chiefs actually relocate? They've been there since 1963, I believe. So when they moved, where did they move from? It was Dallas, Texas, which has also sparked a little bit of noise here as the Dallas mayor, Eric Johnson, has posted to social media about the idea of the Chiefs coming back, said he's confident in Dallas's ability to host a second NFL franchise. And obviously we know, I mean, the Cowboys are the Cowboys. I think that it precedes just the fact of being in Texas, but would be very interesting to see sort of how all of that would play out. Now, Dallas isn't the only option here. It does seem like the biggest of markets that have been, the NFL has sort of pushed for trying to add to the repertoire here, where LA, they wanted to get a team out there. They actually got two out there with the Chargers and Rams both moving recently. They had the Raiders moved from Oakland to Vegas, which is another big destination. But sort of in all of that is the fact that there is St. Louis just an hour or so away from Kansas City. For those of you who don't know, Kansas City is actually in Missouri. So just an hour away within state, you could likely retain most of your fandom. It wouldn't be this moving the franchise all the way across the country that could possibly, exterminate the remaining fan base there. Just some interesting things to consider with this whole conversation. Again, whether or not this actually happens, it's probably more of a long shot than anything. I feel like if you're in the situation of Clark Hunt here, it's probably just trying to lower your spending in terms of these renovation plans. I do feel like it is a very bad look for him. The Chiefs graded out 31st overall in all categories in terms of that report card that was given during the offseason, which is a brutal look. And these surveys that the NFL Players Association, the surveys come out during the season, I believe. I'm not sure exactly when, but it's during the season, I know. And this, there's plenty of time, obviously, for things to change here. But now that the cards have come out after the fact that the Chiefs just won their second Super Bowl in a row, first team to repeat as Super Bowl champions in 2 decades, I do think this is a really bad look for him. And again, whether or not he is handicapped due to the fact that the franchise may not be worth as much as the typical NFL fan may believe, I don't know. That's not really for me to decide here, but he's got to do something here, I think. And ultimately, it's not like there's ever going to be a boycott necessarily or anything like that. Luckily, they have Patrick Mahomes, where you have an organization finishing at the bottom of this report card, which again, a newer initiative from the Players Association. But if that's the case before, maybe you have players not willing to sign with the organization. Lucky for them, they have Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce who can sort of, dampen out that sort of fire that takes place seemingly inside of the facilities themselves. But I don't know. It's interesting to see whether or not they're actually going to try and make steps in the right direction here to try and bring up the image of the franchise itself, but of course themselves if you're the Hunt family. Again, not that with the Chiefs you're in any danger of a boycott putting you out of business necessarily, but could seemingly hurt them in the long run, at least perception-wise, and we'll see how this all plays out there. We will definitely be keeping you updated here on the GSMC Sports Podcast, but that is all we have time for on this subject. We are now going to be taking our final break, and when we come back, moving on to some NBA talk with Julius Randle being ruled out for the remainder of the season. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are headed into our final segment of the day where we are going to be talking about Julius Randle and the Knicks. It was just announced this morning from ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski that Julius Randle will be undergoing a season-ending injury for a shoulder that has been bothering him, has kept him out since January 27th, and we're going to be talking about the implications of that. He's been rehabbing for the past couple months. There hasn't been a definitive timetable really at any point during this rehab process, but they just said they were going to keep reevaluating, and now we find out that they're going to be shutting him down for the rest of the year and hoping that he can come back in 2024-25 fully healthy and ready to make a push, where I do feel like when you're the Knicks in this situation, the East is wide open right now, honestly, for the most part, outside of the Boston Celtics, who, of course, have been rolling in the regular season. I don't think that they are this ungettable juggernaut to necessarily say that this is 100% their conference. And when you're the Knicks, you were having a very solid season, probably could picture themselves being in position to potentially make a finals run. Do I think that that's the team they are? Maybe not necessarily, but they have an elite defense. They have a go-to guy in the big moments in Jalen Brunson, who has time and time again this season proven that he's not scared of the spotlight when the moments get tough. And it's disappointing here to have Julius Randle be out for the remainder of the season. Now, I am not the biggest Julius Randle fan in the world. I do feel like at times he can play a little bit of a selfish game where he's very fixated on himself, getting his level of touches, and he is a very good scorer that a lot of people don't give him credit for, but we have also seen just the mentality with him at times has been a little bit discouraging, where I went to a Celtics-Knicks game earlier this year, and it does seem like there is a level of he lets what happens on the offensive side of the ball really dictate his effort level on defense, where he can get upset and as a result not hustle, stop paying attention, and just sort of space out, not be fully locked in. And I don't know. I don't know if I really see him being able to be a player that is a real contributing piece for a four rounds of a playoff season. Now, That being said, he is a valuable player, of course. I mean, he's over 20 points per game. He provides a level of offense and creation that, whether it's the most efficient type of offense, he's still able to get buckets for a team here in the Knicks who definitely have missed him. He was averaging 24 points per game this year on 47% shooting, the most efficient season he's had since coming to New York, and this is definitely unfortunate. Ultimately, I feel like with Randle, you see at least the level of this Knicks team, who I know that they are on a 3-game losing streak as things currently stand, but I do think that they have some players stepping up as of late that have been impactful for them. We've seen Dante DiVincenzo really take his game to another level, but in those non-Brunson minutes, it does feel like things can get a little bit stagnant at time, and it does concern me in terms of, are they actually capable of making a postseason run without him? As things currently stand, they are the 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. They are half a game behind the Orlando Magic for that 4 seed. Seems like that's going to be the matchup one way or another. They have a couple games on the Heat right now. The Cavs actually are just 1 game ahead of the Knicks and half a game ahead of the Magic. So maybe they could fall their way in, but as this season shortens up, ultimately, the Knicks, it's just one of those things that I've talked about. You know, some teams are different than others in terms of how much should they be worrying about the playoff seeding and everything. But I feel like for the Knicks, it's just worrying about playing your game the best that you can at this point. And again, the Knicks are a team that can be dangerous because of the level of defense that they can play. Now, OG Anunoby is not yet returned, so that could be a big-time loss if he isn't there for him. They're at least getting Mitchell Robinson working his way back into the rotation after missing. It was late November or early December that they lost him, so been a handful of months. He's a key piece of that defense as well. I just don't know necessarily whether or not the Knicks can be truly threatening to a championship contender. If things were to, square off right now, like I said, I do believe that the Eastern Conference is pretty open. The Celtics are the team to beat, but outside of that, and even with them, I don't think that they are unbeatable, but I can't really see a world where the Knicks have the offensive firepower enough without a Randle to take down the Celtics, who are obviously offense heavy, but when they actually try, which is sometimes a thing with them in terms of the level of effort defensively, specifically when you look at some of the, and I don't even know if the rebounding numbers as a whole are necessarily glaring, but at least from the eye test, the Celtics struggle with defensive rebounding sometimes. Seems like they allow a lot of offensive rebounds on the other end. The Knicks can be a physical presence in a series that can absolutely make things difficult, but it just doesn't seem like this is going to be the year for them, which I don't know if it was necessarily going to be the year for them when they traded for OG Anunoby. When that trade went down ahead of the trade deadline, I was thinking that this is a nice move for them. They're probably still a year away, but they have all the fundamental pieces that should be there long-term enough to try and really get a full season under their belt, playing together and being able to come away with a good year. Just hit way too many injuries along the way for New York with OG Anunoby. Obviously Mitchell Robinson earlier in the year, but he's now back, and now Julius Randle being out for the season. I just struggle again to see how they're going to have the level of offensive creation that is, nuanced enough to be a real contender for the finals. Again, I think they make just about any series tough. It's going to be a physically taxing series for any team playing the Knicks, but again, in terms of finals contention, I don't see it this year. And for Julius Randle, hoping that things work out well for him here and he's able to come into 2024-25 healthier, because we've seen injuries be a big part of his career the past couple seasons when he was in New York, where last year he was dealing with injuries headed into the postseason that really derailed him. And, it's tough for him in this situation where you want to tough it out. You spend all this time rehabbing. He put off having surgery because he was hoping that he was going to be able to make his return. But supposedly, according to the story that Adrian Wojnarowski put out there, he saw multiple different specialists that said he could have permanent damage if he tried to force it and return in this situation. Julius Randle still has a handful of years left in his career. He's still only 29. It feels like he's been in the league forever at this point. But, he still is, ideally, when you look at the typical age from when NBA players are peaking, he should be right around his prime. And like I mentioned, he was averaging his best efficiency with the Knicks since coming to the organization. So I definitely don't want to fully turn the page on him. It's going to be interesting to see how they choose to handle him, because he is under contract for 2024-25 and then has a play option headed into the 25-26 season. At that point, his cap number is going to be $32 million. I sort of feel like he turns that down if he is able to have a healthy 24-25, but still a lot of unknowns in that whole equation, of course, and we'll see how it goes. But again, just with this iteration of the Knicks, I do see the vision with them that they want to be this defensive-oriented team. I wonder whether or not Julius Randle is going to have the level of buy-in on his end to be able to sort of play that hard style of basketball that Thibodeau obviously expects out of his players. And it seems like everybody else on the roster is willing to sort of dig the way that Thibodeau wants them to. I don't know if that's necessarily who Julius Randle is as he continues to mature. I'm sure that some of the tendencies that I don't love about him will diminish some, but again, I guess really only time will see in that scenario. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. All these videos go out on socials afterwards. Check in on YouTube. Give us your thoughts on both what I said today and the latest happenings in sports. Try and make this network as interactive as possible. Check out our other shows as well. But thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Have a good one.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.